Welcome everyone to another episode of Two Geeks and a Marketing Podcast. We are here for more news, tech, content and wisdom from the world of marketing, and my co-host is a digital marketing veteran. He's a speaker, trainer and advisor with nearly 3 decades of experience who enjoys revealing visual storytelling techniques to help you build better online campaigns faster. I give you Monsieur Pascal Fintoni.
Well, thank you very much. You've just heard from my co-host, marketing speaker and consultant, who spent his whole career helping his customers keep their marketing simple but effective. He's the author of 𝗧𝗵𝗲 Marketing Plans and the creator of the Roger video series. I give you Mr. Roger Edwards.
Oh, thank you so much, Pascal. And of course, this is episode 125 of our marketing magazine show. Yes, it's a magazine show. That means we have segments. We have In the News. We have a content spotlight where we dig deep into an article, a podcast, or something that's caught our attention. We look back into history at the developments and the technologies that have created the world that we live in today, the marketing world that we live in today. We look at marketing tech and apps specifically, and of course, one of my favorite parts of the show is always film marketing. And Pascal, you've chosen the film marketing film this week, haven't you?
I have indeed. Thank you very much. And listen, we are recording this audio video magazine the day after the VE Day celebration, 80 years celebration. And I felt it was appropriate that we should choose a film that was, kind of telling a story from that era. But we're very lucky because in this audio video magazine, we combine technology, we combine storytelling, we combine history. And I felt it was wholly appropriate to actually go for the Imitation Game.
Yes, of course. Benedict Cumberbatch. Really, really interesting one. Perhaps not the sort of genre that we normally go through. I mean, it's fact. It happened. It's interesting. It's not science fiction. It's not fantasy. But I think you're absolutely right to choose it for the day after VE Day was a shrewd move on your part. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what you've unearthed from the marketing campaign for the Imitation Game. So, Pascal, shall we launch into our magazine?
Let's do this.
Let's do it. We are going to start with In the News.
And we begin with this news. For the first time since 2021, TV advertising returned to growth last year. Investment in the channel grew 3.8% year on year to a total of £5.27 billion.
Generative AI is one of the most talked about topics in almost any industry at the moment, yet only 28% of businesses feel they are fully utilising the technology, according to research from They Do.
Right, well, consumer confidence has dropped by 4 points in April following the introduction of tariffs and the ongoing economic impact, according to GfK's Consumer Confidence Barometer.
More than 1 in 5, as in 21%, job candidates in the marketing industry have reported negative interview experiences, according to data from Reboot Online.
In the first quarter of 2025, UK companies revised their total marketing budget down amid heightened geopolitical tensions, marking the first overall decline in 4 years.
Unilever is planning to boost trust in the FMCG giant's brands with a focus on influencer marketing using the 4 V's: volume, virility, variety and velocity. In other words, more content by more creators distributed at pace in the hope that it will be shared at scale.
Well, Swedish furniture retailer IKEA, also it is known as IKEA, where they come from, has launched a shop in London's Oxford Street, located in a 1920s Grade 2 listed building. Future plans include opening a branch in the centre of Brighton in a hope to bring activities back to UK high streets.
And finally, Hotels.com is putting a mascot front and centre in its marketing once again. Bellboy, an animated hotel desk bell, is replacing Captain Obvious, and its first duties include educating people about tools available via the Hotels.com app and highlighting special offers. All right, so there's quite a lot of stuff to talk about here, Pascal, and the one I want to home in on straight away is Unilever. And it's a bit of a gimmick, actually, but they have made a big play in this recent release that they are going to be focusing in very much on influencers as opposed to more traditional brand building methods. And Unilever, one of the biggest FMCG marketers out there, and they have spent many years creating many very powerful brands. And if you actually look in the comments of quite a lot of these news articles, they're getting lambasted by a lot of people saying, no, 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 for goodness sake, don't focus on influencers, because influence may be slightly a tainted area to go down at the moment. But their chief marketing officer is going on about this concept that he's come up with, which is called the 4Vs, which of course is a play on the 4Ps of marketing. So volume, virility, variety, and velocity is what he's saying, and they're going to be effectively working with influencers. And if you actually read between the lines, Pascal, it basically just says we're going to throw a hell of a lot of stuff against the wall and see how much of it sticks. That's the impression I get. So a combination of influencers and high volume. Do you think that's a good strategy for them to take?
I'm just surprised about this thing. So to begin with, people who have been following, you and I for the last 4.5 years know how we feel about influencer marketing, because it's usually done particularly well. I think for me, it's usually done as an attempt to save money on advertising and that kind of things. It feels dated now. It feels like late, it feels like people are moving on. There's been obviously the backlash against influencers. Now, if they are talking about the more kind of, shall we say, modern thinking of micro influencers, where it's real customers sharing real stories, then maybe, but I don't think you need to have a new acronym for that. The 4Vs feels like you suddenly have discovered influencer marketing. You've suddenly discovered how social media works, and you come up with a very, I don't know, I'm just perplexed by the whole thing. Either the story is being poorly told by the journalist, or frankly the team at Unilever has missed the last 10 years of evolution of what's happening on social. I don't wish to be mean about the whole thing, but it feels just like if that news was 10 years ago or 5 years ago, I'd have said to you, yeah, sure, that makes sense. 2025, with everything that's happening on the web and everything all the effort from government to make the internet, a safer and more decent kind of environment, to do more content about more creators feels just unwise.
Absolutely agree. Absolutely agree. I mean, yes, there's a bit of a gimmick there with the 4Vs, but it does seem to be a little bit of a step back, especially for a global company like Unilever, which is renowned for its incredibly good brand marketing. But we'll wait and see how they get on, and maybe we'll have a look back in 6 months' time and see whether the influencers are working for them. So, generative AI once again in the news. Now, I was drawn to this one, Pascal, because obviously it's saying it's one of the most talked about subjects, and yet only 28% of businesses feel they are fully utilizing it. But once again, the experience I'm having, and I'm sure you're the same, because I know that you're talking to quite a lot of people about AI at the moment, is we're still not getting our marketing strategy right before we start using this stuff. And we are all contributing, therefore, to what was described as AI slop in an article that we covered a couple of shows back. Now, interestingly enough, I was down in London over the last few days, and I was talking to a couple of event organisers and also the editor of one of the financial services magazines. I probably shouldn't say which one it was. Now, they have said that they have noticed recently that, a whole host of people, me included, over the years contribute articles for their magazine. And some of us, like me, I do one every quarter. There are some people who do one every month. And what they have noticed recently is the standard of the articles that are being submitted are absolutely awful. And they reckon that they can immediately spot that the worst ones are just being generated by ChatGPT or Gemini, whatever it is. And this led to a bit more of a discussion, and there was a few other people in the room. And I actually had a couple of marketers say that they are pretty much getting ChatGPT or Gemini to create the first drafts of everything that they do now. And I was actually quite shocked. And I just thought, well, wouldn't it actually be better for you to create the first draft so that it's got your personality, your imprint, and then use AI to refine it. Oh, well, that doesn't really save as much time. I said, well, maybe it doesn't, but you're churning out AI slop, aren't you? And this, some of them were very defensive, and possibly they've been told to do this to cut costs. I don't know, but once again, we've got this great tool out there which we can use as an assistant to create much better things. But at the moment, it seems that people are taking the route of least resistance, which is creating all this mediocre content. So actually, is it really a problem that only 28% of businesses feel they're not fully using the technology? Or are those companies that aren't using it at the moment actually being better because actually the ones that are using it aren't using it right? Did that make
Yeah, no, I
sense?
think that makes sense. It's a very fair point. I think that figure 28% is about right, judging on my interaction with businesses. I was at a conference in Manchester. I was talking about AI, at this moment in time, and the host actually did an opening address and did as a show of hand, who's currently using AI. Sometimes just for productivity gain, not necessarily to do, faster AI slop. And I would say, yeah, about a third, maybe a quarter of the room put their hand up. So for me, I understand why generative AI was the way in. But I think AI needs a bit better PR agent now, because ultimately, I don't think OpenAI and Google and Microsoft and Amazon and Meta spend billions of dollars for a platform to write tweets, LinkedIn posts, or articles. I think that the intention for AI to be used for something far, far more ambitious. And my work really is to remind people about the true function of marketing. It's not just the content bit or the advertising bit, it's multifaceted. And one element that AI is very, very, very good at people are neglecting is market research. I do an exercise where we've been able to create some of the most insightful and useful customer profiles that then would encourage you to do a number of things. So I think for me, generative AI or Gen AI, using its short form, was a interesting way into getting people to pay attention to AI. But if you think that AI is only used to create content, whether that's written form, Roger, or images or video, then you're missing on the 80% of what it's capable of. And I think for me, it's what I mean by when I say AI needs a better PR agent.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right there, Pascal. There's too much talk about using it to create articles and tweets and this, that, and the other, and it's missing the point entirely. Now, this was interesting, wasn't it? For the first time since 2021, TV advertising returned to growth. Now, again, how many times have we said on this show over the last 4 or 5 years that, there have been people out there doom-laden messages saying that TV advertising is dead, and everything else is a much better channel. But here you go, for the first time since 2021, TV advertising is back on the rise. And again, this does include channels like Amazon Prime and Netflix, and we all know that over the last year or so that those platforms have introduced advertising versions of their subscription, so you can pay less, but you have to put up with a certain amount of advertisements. So that possibly could explain the reason. But what it does prove is that TV advertising definitely isn't dead, like a lot of people, Gary Vaynerchuk perhaps, said in the past.
I think for me, it's interesting to link that to the one that I read as well around UK companies, reducing their marketing budget for the first time in 4 years. So there may be a reduction, but there was also a reallocation. And my guess is that we're going to see an interesting return, which was part of one of the content spotlights from a few months ago, where you're talking about print media and direct mailing, personalized, of course. And my guess is that people are going to start to see that, particularly the aspirations to get more value from social media platforms is not proven to be correct, and they want to reallocate to things that works well. To your point, what TV needs is good content. You need to affix your advert to a program that is going to ask people. So I think TV is benefiting from a reduction in time spent on social media. And I think TV is also benefiting, which is not as good news, a reduction in people going to the movies.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would agree with that. Fabulous. Well, there's lots of really interesting stuff. I'm going to call a halt to the news now because we could spend another 20 minutes looking at the other items, but we need to move on, Pascal, and look at our content spotlights. In the content spotlight section of the show, Pascal and I bring to the table a piece of content. It could be an article, it could be a podcast, it could be a video, and we go into it in a little bit of detail. So, Pascal, what have you got for us this week?
I've gone for an article, and I must confess, the title just really, draw my attention. So, I do a lot of workshops. We speak at conferences, and we have our own little sayings. There must be some Rogerisms and Pascalisms out there that people tend to lean to. And there's one that is not my creation, which I say, your reputation is what your customer says when you're not in the room. And that kind of makes people thinking about personal branding and activities. And this article, written by Mohammed Zulhusni for Marketing Tech News, the title is as follows: What AI says about you when you're not in the room is essentially now the new SEO, or the new kind of personal branding strategy. And what Mohammed is doing is reflecting on a conversation that he had with someone called Jason Barnard, is the founder and CEO of Calicube. And Jason Barnard is reflecting on the impact of AI on search behavior from the point of view of the users, but also the results presented by the AI summaries that are now dominating on the top part of any search result from mobile phones to desktop, as inviting us to reflect on what we're going to do about managing our personal brand. And unlike previous content spotlight, I'm not going to do a deep description of the article because I want people to spend time to actually go through it very, very slowly. So I want to give you just the essence and then get your reaction in terms of, is 2025 the year where we're going to have to start to actually commit more to content creation, quality content creation, to take control of our personal brand, but also the way in which the AI summaries are featuring us. That's really, really important. So before, ChatGPT, people went on Google, people went on Yahoo, people went on Bing, and they may put a few words to the effect, maybe your name, Roger, maybe your book, maybe, your occupation, and then hope for the best. And that's what we've been used to do. For 20, 30 years, we put a few words and hope for the best, knowing that search engines are not necessarily always working correctly. What we have now with AI and AI summaries, you can actually put literally a 4 or 5 line description about what you wish to learn about Roger Edwards or Pascal Fintoni. You can even use voice now and have a 2-3 minute monologue to your phone, because for a fact that with precision you're going to get better results. But the rub is that if by accident or neglect, or simply because of busy lives, you've not taken the trouble to create information that matches what people hope to find about you, then you may not be featured by the AI summaries, or in an attempt to always have an answer, the AI summaries may hallucinate. So let's take an example of a business owner who's been just very, very busy working, head down, nose to the grindstone, and did not put the effort into content creation. So there's not much information at all about the business, but that business owner is active networking, is active maybe as a podcast guest, is active maybe as a speaker at events. So indeed, people become curious and they want to go online and find information about this individual. And what is interesting about AI, if there's very little, that to begin with, it becomes very fragrant, that there's not much, because unlike a typical search engine page where there's a bunch of links and you could have your LinkedIn profile, your website, and so on, what AI summaries do, they summarize the content. They don't just give you a list of links, they actually summarize content. So if content doesn't exist, that could be a very short summary, or far worse, it could be a false summary in an attempt, as you've seen you time and time again. So this article really is asking us to reflect and be honest with our own efforts in terms of personal branding. What is reassuring, though, in terms of what to do about it, Jason talks about what he called the spoken wheel model, which is something that arcs back to the early days of SEO. So happily, it talks about that you must look after your website that defines who you are, what you offer, and what people should pay attention to you. And of course, implicitly talks about blogging, talks about creating useful information, building authority. Because if you don't do that at a time where we're no longer not being served hyperlinks, we're being served information. If you don't actually think of it as a summary of existing information, then your personal brand, your business brand, and by extension, the level of inquiries will start to diminish over and over again as AI becomes the dominant form of content gathering. So again, I would invite people to read the article. It's really well explained, very well structured by Mohammed. And I think the advice from Jason is super practical and very, very achievable by all. But it got me thinking that even I not understood the impact of AI summaries. It's much more significant than just, oh, well, it's a different way of doing search engine. We're moving away from a list of links to summary of information that may or may not exist.
Yeah, this is really interesting, isn't it? And what's also interesting, if a little bit sinister, is that obviously when SEO was relatively new, a whole industry was created of people who said that they could get you on the first page of Google results, and it became a real sort of black art, didn't it? The whole idea of SEO and stuffing your websites with backlinks and keywords and this, that, and the other, and metadata. But there were a lot of people made a lot of money becoming those SEO experts. And already I'm seeing people who are claiming that they will be able to get you to appear in the answers that the AI generative AI platforms like ChatGPT come up with. In fact, I noticed on LinkedIn there was a guy the other day who Marcus Sheridan called out and said, actually, what you're talking about is true, but you can't really do it because they sort of don't update, or at least on ChatGPT, they don't update the sort of baseline date of what it knows. They don't do that every day. So if you put something out tonight that you think might get you noticed, it might be another month before ChatGPT has access to that stuff you've put out, if that makes sense. Obviously, I imagine they'll get quicker at doing that as time goes by. But at the moment, the knowledge that these AI platforms have has a time-bound date, and it does get updated, but not that often. But this whole industry is just built up of these people who are claiming that they can now do to you on AI platforms what they used to be able to do to you on SEO. Isn't it a shame that we just have these same sort of people jumping on bandwagons in a sort of quite sinister way? But no, it's very important that we have a look at this and try to understand the difference between how SEO worked, which was very much about keywords and about getting your phrase in or the question that was being asked. And I think that nowadays, rather than people saying things like, what's the best 10 apps for marketers, that would be the sort of thing you would put into a Google search. But for an AI search, you're more likely to say something like, I'm a marketer, I run a team of 15 people, we've got a budget of this, and we're looking for 10 to 15 apps that we want to use that can help improve our efficiency. And then the AI will give you effectively the answer, but you've phrased it in a completely different way. And I think we need to move in our mindset in that direction, away from how we interact with the likes of Google to how we interact with the likes of AI. Because I think that, again, if you ask AI the same questions you ask search engines, I think that's when we start getting into that mediocre territory again.
You would do, and in a way, the way in which somebody at a conference said, or the way the AI summary works, it's more like someone who's a journalist or a news curator, because what they do is literally they borrow the content from your website or from your LinkedIn articles and so on. So for me, it was just a different way, another way to encourage people to plan, to analyze customers' wishes and aspirations for the future, and create information accordingly. And I think for me, it's also a way to say to people, if you've not been investing time and effort into content creation, this is, I think, your final shout. Otherwise, you just become invisible on the internet.
Indeed. So Pascal, my choice this week is again, it's a bit of a back to basics one again, but like you, I was attracted by the headline of this article, which has appeared in in Marketing Week. So the headline is "Why It Works." That's a great way to start an article, isn't it? Why it works. Why the famous five did a jolly clever job for GWR. And this is written by Rich Shotton for Marketing Week. Now, this is quite funny because the first line, the first paragraph of the article runs as follows. Did you know that Great Western Railway, GWR, was fondly known as God's Wonderful Railway in the early 1900s? And it says that might be hard to believe when you consider the average UK rail experience in 2025 feels far from divine. Now, I chose this article on Monday. And since then, I've been down to London and back. And as you know, we were talking about this in the green room before we hit record. I had a pretty dire experience travelling back up to Edinburgh yesterday. A 4-hour journey turned into a 7-hour journey, and various nightmarish things happened on the way up. So I'm definitely not thinking God's Wonderful Railway at the moment. And that just made me laugh a little bit. But this is really interesting because this article shows a marketing campaign that focused in purely on storytelling and purely on emotion, rather than focusing in on more statistical angles. Now, the problem that GWR had in 2017 was that a lot of people were just abandoning the railways. And GWR, and for those of you who are not geographically knowledgeable, GWR is the trains that go out of Paddington generally. So they go along to the west. You go into places like Bristol, Cardiff, Plymouth. All of that part of the world is served by GWR, the Great Western Railway. So what they wanted to do was to focus in on storytelling. And of course, that part of the world, if you look back in literature, was the setting for Enid Blyton's famous Five. So they came up with this advertising campaign that effectively used the characters out of the famous Five, but they angled it and made it more about Great Western. And the first ad was called The Five Get There First, which is again a nice tie into the way that the titles of the books were organised. And effectively what it did is it showed the children, the famous five, they are going to the beach with their parents, but their parents go in the car and they go on the train. And of course the people on the train get there first, and then the parents arrive later all looking all dishevelled and tired and grumpy because they had such a dreadful time in the car. And this particular advert got really, really high scores on Test Your Ad, but it also generated 14.9 million extra GWR journeys and an extra £200 million in revenue, which is remarkable. And the agency that came up with this campaign, Adam and Eve DDB, described it as a jolly good result all round. And of course, jolly good was one of the catchphrases of the famous Five, which I think is actually quite nice. And the rest of the article is basically saying, you know, what traditionally a company like GWR would have done would have made it a very statistical based campaign, like saying stuff like the train gets you there 50% faster, or, you know, 95% of the trains leave on time, or the speed of the journey on the train is an hour, the speed of the journey in a car is 3 hours, that sort of thing. But what they did here is that they're effectively playing into the emotion of the characters. So the characters are getting there early, and you can see them relaxing on the beach. They've got their picnic out, and that's when their parents arrive, all dishevelled. And it's a sort of behavioural science people call this the identifiable victim effect. And in this particular story, you could argue that either the children's or the parents are the identifiable victims, but one group have it good, i.e. the kids, and one group have it bad, i.e. the the parents, and which group do you want to associate yourself with? Well, of course, you want to get there quickly. You want to be like lying on the beach with your picnic out when the parents arrive looking all disheveled. And it's that emotional resonance that made this campaign particularly successful. And I guess the main reason for me bringing this one up, apart from the fact that I just got attracted to the fact that it was a train, it was about trains, and it was also a bit nostalgic, is that I've found a lot of marketing recently. Again, financial services is where I do a lot of my work, is incredibly statistical. It's always about 1 in 5 people won't retire with enough income. 1 in 3 people will get cancer during their lives. 20% of people this, 80% of people that. You don't get the emotion. You don't get the storytelling. You don't get that connection with real people. And therefore, it's not as successful. And I think this particular campaign and this particular article just highlights that if you're focusing on real people, or imaginary people, I guess, with the famous 5, but make it feel real and make it about their emotions, then it's gonna work for you. So that's, I guess, the call to action of this article is that marketers should embrace emotion a lot more, do storytelling from a behavioral insights point of view, and tap into the humanity, because I think a lot of us are going down the more statistical route, and maybe that's because a lot of marketers now are all about statistics. How are our adverts performing, and that's, people are very results based, but the result of that is that we're doing a lot more statistical based advertising, and that doesn't resonate with the customers as much as emotional based articles like adverts like this.
Thank you very much. What a great selection. And as I was listening to you, I was literally imagining the advert itself, but also taking me back to reading 𝗵𝗲. So we had it translated in French. It was called Club des Cinq, so Club of 5. And interestingly, it was taking place in Brittany for us, not in the West Countries. So, but the same characters, some adventures, the same kind of getting lost, but having a picnic basket that it would cheer you up, and then you can take on the day ahead. And I think that the alignment of the nostalgia, the 𝗵𝗲, the sense of adventure, sense of wonder, but also the era of this year in the UK, we are celebrating 200 years of rail travel and rail technology, if I may use the term. So there's everything there that is working very, very well. But I agree with you about. So I remember my very first boss in marketing, a wonderful man called Andy Tidy, that told me so much that I still use to this day. He used to say, I worked in travel, my first job was in tour operation, and he used to get really upset saying, "Don't give me the data, I want the drama." And I used to think sometimes, so we would go away, all licking out wounds after another successful pitch to the boss, thinking, what on earth is he on about? Don't give me the data, give me the drama. But what he was saying is, there's no story here. You're just saying that we are cheaper than the others, which is not always wise, or that 1 in 5 have done this. And this is now, I know, called the nudge theory, where if you say that, 1 in 5 or 1 in 10 do this, then you'll be nudged to do something a bit differently. But perhaps, everything, nothing lasts forever. And I think, to use what I call factual marketing may have had its day. It's all about cycles. And we need to go back to, I think, that kind of cognitive marketing where across generation, I'd like to think, young people still read the 𝗵𝗲. I don't know if they do, perhaps on the iPad or the Kindle. So you can imagine from 3 generations would relate to the story and the sense of traveling by train, which is still an adventure. I mean, it can go the other way sometimes. I just like it a lot, and I like this reminder, the association as well with existing characters and stories. Because I think that for all, I'm a big fan of using mascots in business for marketing. When you invent something brand new, you have a double challenge of someone has to accept the new mascot and then has to find it relatable and take in the stories. With the 𝗵𝗲, it's established. You already have that connection. And talking of mascots, I know that they may be listening, but if we could stop the LNER advert with a silly puppet, that would be very happy.
I was just thinking exactly the same thing, having travelled up from London yesterday on LNER. I think that LNER puppet, or that LNER Muppet, It's a Muppet, isn't it? It's definitely a Muppet. I mean, it's just, the two advertising campaigns are night and day. It's interesting as well. Just as a sideline, LNER put out a social media post on Facebook and X yesterday, because it was actually 6 years yesterday since the introduction of the class 800 Azuma trains on the East Coast Main Line. And underneath, pretty much everybody says, yeah, okay, 6 years. It's definitely a time for you to rip out those absolutely hideous standard class seats and put in something that doesn't destroy your back after 20 minutes sitting in them, which I thought was actually quite funny. Thank you so much, Pascal, for your selection this week. Always great to talk about our content. Let's slow things down and pay a little bit of tribute to the people in the past who shape the present that we live in today. So we're going to set the controls of the TARDIS, fire up the flux capacitor, and head back in time to this week in history.
And in 1816, George E. Clymer invents the first printing press in Philadelphia, USA. It was an iron horizontal plate hand printing press using a system of compound levers and an eagle-shaped counterweight.
In 1928, Walt Disney's Mickey Mouse made his debut with the premiere of the cartoon Plain Crazy. As test screening to theatre audiences and potential distributors, the then silent cartoon failed to impress.
Wow, but in 1948, British music composer Brian Eno is born, best known as the keyboard player for 1970s band Roxy Music and the producer of ambient music for films. He's also the creator of the 6-second startup music sound for the Windows 95 operating system.
And in 2005, Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, directed by George Lucas, starring Ewan McGregor, Hayden Christensen and Natalie Portman, premieres at the Cannes Film Festival. So, Pascal, tell me a little bit more about this printing press.
Now listen, for all I am a digital marketing guy and I'm very fond of what AI can help us do, I love press, I love printing media. And I literally, find it fascinating that with some people that would spend the entire night putting letters together in reverse order, because of course the printing had to go and produce, the first magazines. It just fascinates me the effort, the vision, but also the business sense. So George E. Clymer, realized that before the printing press, people used to use the big mechanical rollers. So some of you who went to school maybe in the 70s or even the 60s, remember that was vaguely what our teachers used to use with the acetate and so on. But so George Clymer invented the first one, but actually it just didn't work. It wasn't taken up. So his invention got overtaken by another one 5 years later, which was from a company called the Washington Press. And sometime being the first one out does not always guarantees success. So what George E. Clymer did, because he thought, what do we go from there? He actually changed tactic and sold the patent and the press to a different territory. And in fact, therefore, the old George E. Clymer printing press is now available and made available in England and then the rest of Europe. So it was kind of interesting. So your first inventor, it's working. You can't fault the press itself, but somebody comes along 5 years later, perhaps because the market is then ready for it and overtakes you. What do? Then you change your business strategy and go to a territory where you'll be the only one. And this press is quite well known and is being featured a lot. And this eagle-shaped counterweight. So imagine this kind of humongous horizontal plate, and on the top of this eagle, very, very big eagle, can also now be seen at a place called Beamish Museum, not far from where I live. So we went there about 2-3 weeks ago, and I made a beeline for the newsagents. So what they have done there, they have recreated in 1850s village in Beamish Museum, and there was a newsagent. There was also a travel agent, and the staff wear the costumes of the time. It's really quite well done. I went upstairs, and sure enough, you could smell it, you could hear the printing press being used, and there, in full glory, was the eagle-shaped counterweight. And I just can't believe that I saw it, and then a few weeks later, I was able to introduce this into This Week in History.
Ah, fantastic. That's a really good story. I do have to go to Beamish one of these days. I've never been, and it looks fantastic. Now, I did think about talking about Brian Eno because, yes, he was the keyboard player from Roxy Music. He also produced, as far as I can remember, some of the early U2 albums. I think he produced The Unforgettable Fire and The Joshua Tree, which were obviously two of U2's biggest and most best-selling albums. But I thought I'd focus back in on Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. I mean, again, it made me laugh. There was a social media post I saw a couple of days ago, and it was just something like, you can tell Gen X because they will always refer to what is now Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope. They will always just refer to it as Star Wars because that was the original, and when it came out it was just Star Wars, not Star Wars Episode 4. But it's funny, isn't it? I can't believe, for a start, it's 20 years since Star Wars Revenge of the Sith. I'm now sitting here thinking I don't think I've probably watched it more than twice since it was originally released. And I've probably lost count of the number of times I've watched Star Wars Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. And again, it just really brought it home to me that you've got such a phenomenally good franchise, and yet it's possible to have too much of a good thing. And this was a film that's now 20 years old. Now, of course, we've got Disney Plus churning out so much Star Wars content that I just don't watch any of it anymore. Although some people do say that the Andor series is definitely worth watching. But what a disappointment the prequel Star Wars films were compared to the originals. And the fact that it's 20 years since the prequels makes me feel even older when I think back to how earlier the originals were.
For me, what is interesting, like you, I'm shocked, 20 years, and it now belongs to history, which is a bit distressing. But for me, to be a Star Wars fan is hard, is painful, because there are 9 movies, and 6 of them are not particularly fond of, which is really quite distressing. And I think, episode 1, 2, 3, too convoluted, not enough sense of adventure. Almost lost track of the reason why episode 4, 5, 6 worked is because of the sense of bringing together, the kind of matinee style swashbuckling, combining, pirates with wizards and samurais with, kind of thing. So I think for me, the sense of losing the sense of story, and then, the sequels, as they are also known, it was a fair attempt, but it just didn't work. And then with regard to the TV series, I would say The Mandalorian is the only one that's worked well, because of course it's taking place during that phase in the era of 4, 5, 6, and the look and feel and the storytelling, the simplicity as well. I think is a lesson there, is very, very important. But interestingly, Star Wars Episode 3 was doing the rounds at cinemas again recently. It seemed to have done very well, but they're also talking about doing screenings of Episode 4, but the original print, not the one that's been meddled with by George Lucas, although he's entitled to tweak his work, of course.
Of course. Yeah, interesting stuff, but it's always a pleasure to review some of these historical events that shape the world that we live in today. But Pascal, shall we bring ourselves back to the present and move on to marketing, tech, and apps? All right, Pascal, what technological marvels have you got to share with us today?
Well, listen, I wanted to build on the content spotlight selection, this idea of building authority and relevancy in the age of AI summaries. And the idea being that you've got to really get going now with your content creation, but in a way that is meaningful, in a way that is being well thought out and researched. And I think the one thing that I would recommend is to avoid this idea of, more is better. Better is better. And I think it's also time for marketers to, you and I would always favor tools and text that is maybe free or is a freemium, but sometimes you've got to spend a bit of money to get quality support from those digital solutions. So I've chosen two that will help you understand a lot more about what your future customers will find interesting and relevant and help you craft meaningful, authoritative content. So the first one is called 𝗧𝗵𝗲, 𝗧𝗵𝗲.com, and think of it as your digital market research assistant. Through essentially thinking and reflecting at your ideal customers, 𝗧𝗵𝗲 can give you indication of what your customers visit in terms of websites and online destinations, what they enjoy reading, what they enjoy watching, what they enjoy listening to, and follow. And this is not for you to use AI to then plagiarize the existing content. This is for you to get inspiration to create your own content with your own voice. And I must insist on that because there's far too much of those YouTube shorts and TikTok videos where literally there's a guy is kind of opening gambit was, I'm going to show you how to ethically steal your competitor's content. As in, theft is theft. There's no ethical theft. There's not an ethical way somebody or whatever, or an ethical way of not paying your tax. So for me, 𝗧𝗵𝗲 will do the analysis for you of what your customers find interesting. Your job is to actually be able to define your customers. The other one, which is a bit of an oldie but a goodie, is called 𝗏𝗏𝗍𝗲. Now, 𝗏𝗏𝗍𝗲 is something that I used to recommend many, many years ago when SEO was a big part of what I did. And think of it as your content IDs engine. So now that you know what people find interesting thanks to 𝗧𝗵𝗲, or now you know where they might go so that you can do some guest publication, then what about finding out precisely the kind of questions, the kind of resources, the kind of, I suppose, concerns, aspirations, and wishes your customers have. And 𝗏𝗏𝗍𝗲 can give you an indication on the particular content topic and particular market niche, what is currently trending, but also will highlight what they call timeless classics, because I think we've got to be careful not to jump on trends, because it may not actually work longer than a few months, but something that has worked forever in terms of your clients' pain points and aspirations and wishes could be very, very interesting. So it is time to invest effort and money into your authority. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 and 𝗏𝗏𝗍𝗲 are my selections.
Well, remembered and reminded. I used to use 𝗏𝗏𝗍𝗲 all the time. And obviously I've stopped using it at some point, and it wasn't until I saw the name there when I was reviewing the show notes earlier. I think, oh, 𝗏𝗏𝗍𝗲. I haven't used that for ages. I wonder why I stopped using it. I can't remember, to be perfectly honest, but it's definitely worth revisiting, looking at these apps. So thank you so much for the reminder. Okay, so my selection this week is triggered by a bit of a rant, actually. Now, as I said, I was on a train journey this week, and yesterday coming back up to Edinburgh was a bit of a nightmare for the reason of delays and people trespassing on the railway. But one of the things that I've noticed, and this isn't just on trains these days, Pascal, this is out on buses, it's on aeroplanes, it's even sitting in the park or something like that, is that people seem to think it's okay nowadays. And I'm sure I'm turning into a grumpy old man, I apologize, but people seem to think it's okay these days to watch films or to listen to music on mobile phones or iPads or tablets or whatever it is with the volume turned really loud, and they don't listen to it with headphones on. So they expect the entire world, or the entire people in the railway carriage, or the entire people on the bus to listen along with them at this loud volume. And I don't know when this became pseudo acceptable, but I don't find it acceptable at all. I find it downright rude, and it sort of feels as though these people are entitled, and it just really winds me up and think, why aren't you using your headphones? And of course, maybe the reason is that a few years ago Apple stopped giving you a pair of headphones with each new iPhone. I've got a drawer full of Apple headphones here from each iPhone that I've bought over the years. And even with your iPad, you used to get a set of headphones. Now you don't. So maybe people just think, well, I've not got any headphones, I'm not going to go out and buy any, so I'm just going to listen to it with the volume turned up. Just winds me up. So if this is you, I'm pointing the finger at you, stop it. It's not good. It's rude. Stop doing it. Buy some earphones. The one thing it doesn't cure, though, of course, is the annoying person who's having a long conversation with somebody, and you can only hear their part of the conversation. You know, earphones won't solve that problem. And again, another train journey a couple of weeks ago, I was going down to London, and there was this, and I was sat in the quieter carriage. I noticed that LNER have now called it the quieter carriage as opposed to the quiet carriage, which sort of lets them off the hook if they don't police it properly. But this guy was just going on. He was so loud. He was ranting and raving, and he was talking about this project and that project, and I was hearing every single detail from his point of view. And you could tell that a lot of people in this carriage were getting very annoyed. And in the end, I just had enough, and I stood up and I said, "Excuse me, but you do know that this is the quiet carriage, don't you?" And I pointed at the sign. And in fairness, he looked incredibly embarrassed. He got up and then he went and spent the next 90 minutes in the vestibule of the train carrying on his conversation. Now, the other problem is that these days you're a bit scared of having that sort of confrontation, are you? Because the person might just turn around and tell you to F off and carry on doing it, or worse, they'll pull a knife on you or something like that. So I think I got away with that. I even got a little bit of a sort of thumbs up from a few of the other people in the carriage. But that's a really long, convoluted introduction to my marketing tech and apps. Is that I came across an article on CNET which actually lists the best wireless earbuds and the prices. So if you're one of these people who thinks that it's okay to treat everybody to your music and treat everybody to your films or half of your conversations, please go and have a look at the Sony WF-1000XM5. That is the recommended best wireless ear. I thought it might be the Apple AirPods, but it's not. They are about £200. Most of these tend to be about £200, to be perfectly honest. Second is the Technics EAH AZ100, and third is the Apple iPods Pro, which is a USB-C arrangement. So yeah, I mean, it's not particularly a marketing tech and apps, but, you know, we've got to be considerate to the people around us. And most of the time, if I'm watching something, I will use earphones. If I've not got my earphones or I've forgotten them, I will turn the volume down and watch a video with subtitles. Or if I want to listen to music, it's just tough. I don't believe that you should be sharing it with the world.
No, and frankly, whether it's a quieter coach or almost quieter coach, whatever they're going to invent, I think that this has to stop. And I'm sure with the level of content they're going to be getting. I mean, so I traveled from Durham to Manchester and back, and it was just awful. Everybody had their phone out, full volume, listening and watching TikTok videos, YouTube, having conversations and so on. And yeah, I'm just not sure where it all started. But interestingly, the conference attendees who all travelled and converged towards Manchester literally had the same conversation. What is going on?
Okay, let's stop ranting. I've been a bit grumpy today, and that's because of that really hard train journey I had yesterday. We are now at the part of the show which we always enjoy, probably the most in our magazine selection. We are going to move on to film marketing. Well, Pascal, it was your choice of film this episode, and you chose The Imitation Game from 2014, starring Benedict Cumberbatch. Shall we watch the trailer?
What did you do during the war?
I worked in a radio factory.
What did you really do during the war?
Are you paying attention?
If you speak a word of what I'm about to show you, you will be executed.
It's beautiful. It's the greatest encryption device in history. The Germans use it for all major communications.
Everyone thinks Enigma is unbreakable.
Let me try, and we'll know for sure.
Mr. Turing, do you know how many have died because of Enigma?
No, I don't.
3. While we've been having this conversation.
What is it that we're really doing?
We're going to break an unbreakable Nazi code.
Oh.
To pull off this genius routine, one actually has to be a genius.
Why are you building a machine?
The machine will allow us to break every message and win the war.
could help us, but you won't.
You will never understand the importance of what I am creating here.
I'm just a mathematician.
You've got more secrets than the best of them.
Sometimes it is the people who no one imagines anything of, who do the things that no one can imagine.
That is a good film, isn't it? It's a really good film. Perhaps not the usual film you would expect from us. It's not science fiction, it's not fantasy, it's not action and adventure. This is quite a thought-provoking, quite hard-hitting film, isn't it?
It is, and I just want to spend just a moment to obviously recognize the incredible contribution from Alan Turing, often coined as a father of modern computing, but of course, who he represents, which were the individuals at Bletchley Park who worked tirelessly for several years to crack the code of the Enigma machine and made a contribution to the success of the conclusion of the Second World War. And again, we were recording this a day after the VE Day celebration around Europe, 80 years on. And yeah, I'll leave it as that, but I just want to make sure that we understand that for all we're going to talk about the film, the filmmaking, the film marketing, this is actually based on true facts and true stories. A story that had to be kept secret till at least the 70s and the 80s because all those incredible individuals, men and women, had to sign the Secrets Act. And in the film, actually, the character played by Mark Strong makes the point literally, if you're in, you're in. And if you divulge anything you're involved in, you will be executed on the case because of treason. Mm-hmm. And there was a lot of interviews yesterday on the BBC radio from people in their 90s now who had made the contribution to the Second World War. And for me, it's also what VE Day represents is that coalition of different nations where there were so many things happening at the same time. So you had obviously the now famous stuff of legend, the cracking of the code of the Enigma machine. You had, of course, what was happening with Operation Mincemeat by sending misinformation via different routes to Nazi Germany. You had the bombing of the submarine bases all over France. You had the liaison with the French resistance. So you can imagine there was all this stuff going on. But there is one event, that was very, very important, is, of course, to work from Alan Turing and his team in creating a computer that did not exist, that he had to imagine, that could essentially compute thousands upon thousands of variation on the code of the Enigma machine within minutes and hours, as opposed to what would have taken a human being a years to do. So that's the context, and then add on to that, therefore, artistry, the vision from the director. And interestingly, when I was making the show notes, I was thinking Morton Tilden. This rings a bell, and of course we reviewed his movie that he made 2 years after Imitation Game called Passengers. You remember Passengers? Mm-hmm. Really, really good time with regard to Passengers. So the Imitation Game, it just as rich, and because it is about story, crafting a story, I think the tagline says it all. The true enigma was the man who cracked the code.
Indeed. And am I dreaming this, or have I made it up? But when I originally watched this film, there's a J.R. Tolkien connection somehow, isn't it? But it's not. I just can't think what it was. Have I made that up?
No, I think the connection is around them being ending up to work in education and being a professor at the university, and therefore that they'll be in the same circles, if you will. Yeah. But Joe obviously was a soldier, as we know, in the Second World War. So this film does a number of things, and it was a risk because you could have stuck to telling the story as is, and then, go from, almost like logically and in chronological order, this is what's happened. But they bring in some elements. So they bring in the element of new technology. I mean, can you imagine this was the 1940s, building a computer with doubts from authority, which I think we can all relate. Yep. This is, of course, era of women having less rights than men. So this is also tackled by the film, and Keira Knightley, who plays John Clark, is, if you like, the messenger for that particular theme. And of course, it's the era of prejudice, where homosexuality was deemed to be a crime. And there's a truly heartbreaking final 10 minutes of the film where you learn that Alan Turing was found guilty of being an homosexual and had to undergo chemical castration, and it was so punitive that he committed suicide a year later. So you're left literally, after this film, just completely dumbfounded how a national hero could be so mistreated by 1950s England. These were a different time. And with that context, the film marketing campaign really starts with something that I can't be sure whether or not the filmmakers had a link with the royal family and then the officers, I guess. But the campaign started literally on Christmas Day 2013, because back then it was still called Twitter, Roger. And the tweet, which I put in the shownotes for you, reads as follows: "In honor of today's royal pardon, please find the first still released from the upcoming film, The Imitation Game." And we have Benedict Cumberbatch, who looks very, very like Alan Turing in terms of costumes and whatever, next to the machine. And that was literally, as you can see here, 25 to 10 at night on Christmas Eve. So the royal pardon is almost a trigger event. So people could think, well, crikey, that feels awfully cruel and mean that it takes nearly 60 years to pardon someone who literally will have saved millions of lives through his creation. But that's kind of the beginning of the campaign. And from that point on, you had, what you and I've seen before, a very interesting use of time where between that Christmas Eve 2013 and June 2014, that relationship with the media where stills and behind the scenes static photography is being released little by little, as well as the posters. But the campaign, as you and I will understand it, probably starts with the launch of the official website. Now, sadly, this website doesn't exist anymore. And you and I have mentioned this before, Roger. Please give us your Roger and I will host those websites for you people. I don't know, it only costs you $10 a year. But thanks to the Wayback Machine, you can go back, and for a 2014 website, it is really, really impressive. The interactivity, when you go on the website, the music plays from Alexander Desplat, the French music composer. You can look at, of course, the story, they play scenes, but what they had, which was very, very clever, because the whole thing's about solving a problem, solving cryptic enigmas and so on the official website, visitors could actually unlock exclusive content by solving a puzzle, which is a big central theme of the movie, because this is how they select, obviously, the team. So I put the link in for everyone, and we'll put it in the show notes so that you can have a play by going to the Wayback Machine and try the puzzle. But one tactic that obviously you and I I've heard before is to create, obviously, some early form of influencer marketing. In November 2014, moments before the release of the movie, they organized a private screening with pretty much the who's who of Silicon Valley, with some of the cast and crew, because what they wanted, literally, the CEO of Google, the CEO of YouTube and Facebook before it was Meta, were there. And then they would use their social media account, and back then Google Plus still existed, to then shout about a movie. Do you think that was a good move on their part?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, that was in the early days of influencers, wasn't it? I suppose before the concept became a little bit tainted. But like anything, you've got to target the right people, and I think in this particular instance, they targeted the right people, and it worked for them during the campaign.
What I think is interesting about the campaign, so you must remember, I know it's hard for us in 2025 audiences, but this was deemed to be a low budget movie or a medium budget movie, almost like an independent production. In fact, if you look at the history of the movie and if you look at the opening credits, there are quite a few logos being kind of demonstrated. The distribution changed hands many a time in the last 10 years. So it was a mere $14 million. I know it's a lot of money, but in today's parlance, it's just nothing. So like true independent producers and filmmakers, the festival circuit was the way to go. So the movie had its unofficial premiere screening at the Telluride Film Festival. That was in the summer 2014. So we're talking about a good 5 months or 4 months before its true release. And what followed was nothing short of 50 festivals worldwide. And what they were looking here to do, by inviting, of course, the press and other, fans, is to create a movement, a swell of interest. Because to your point, people could have been forgiven to dismiss it as a semi-documentary. And this may shock some people, but I don't know how you feel about it, but I don't think Alan Turing is necessarily well known or is not an established name in some circles. I don't know how you feel about it.
No, I mean, I think it's specialist history, isn't it, to a certain extent? When you think of World War II, you'd think of the D-Day landings. So, you're always going to think of films about the D-Day landings, or if it was World War I, films like 1917, Paths of Glory we've talked about here on the show before. But I think that this is the sort of secret stuff that goes on behind the scenes is a little bit less known by people because it hasn't been talked about in films or in books as much. So I can understand why people don't know who Alan Turing is. And of course, because of the horrible way that he was treated by the English authorities during the 1950s, I imagine there was an element of him being almost like rubbed out of existence. And we've had to re-educate everybody, both about the things that he was genuinely famous for and the unfortunate way he was treated.
Absolutely. And so I think, for the filmmakers, they had three target audiences. You've got those who find history interesting, particularly the Second World War and everything that came in terms of the Allies and they worked together. You've got those who have an interest in the history of tech and science. And of course, then you are, to your point, the intrigue that comes with the fact that we still probably don't know half of what really happened to, liberate Europe from the Nazi occupation. So that's kind of interesting. But one that I thought was really, really worth noting is back to your point about nostalgia. Is leading up to the release of the movie, worldwide, the New York Times actually reprinted the 1942 puzzle that was used in the Telegraph back in the days to recruit the code breakers that would end up spending most of their lives, 2-3 years minimum, at Bletchley Park. Yeah. And literally people could do it, they could enter the puzzle as it was, and if they were a part of the winners, they could be selected to win a trip to London and the tour of Bletchley Park. And I thought it's so simple, but it could have been missed completely as a PR stunt. Yeah. And it's just in front of. Of course, they had to use tech, and I'll close quickly on some of the PR stunts. So, do you remember fondly the Google Hangouts, the early days of Google? So, Google being one of these, I suppose, sponsors or champions of the movie, they organized a Google Talk and come out with a Google Hangout so people around the world could watch a Q&A between different guests, including the nephew of Alan Turing, Sir John Dermot Turing. And you can still find that Google Talk and that Google Hangout on the YouTube, which I thought was quite exquisite. This was supported by quite an impressive promo pack for, once again, what is deemed to be an independent movie. So the posters that borrow the kind of cinematography of the film, but the whole thing's about the machine, right? That Alan Turing is heard to call Christopher. And it's about those dials, those kind of wheels, almost like the wheels of a skateboard turning around and making all that noise. And I think they've used a lot of that kind of idea of punching as well, the letters on the Enigma machine. So all that kind of design leitmotif has been used for a series of posters, which I think has worked very, very well. There was an attempt to create intrigue, but actually was kind of kiboshed by the internet. So they wanted to do a moment where they would release a photo, a teaser poster, Roger, where Benedict Cumberbatch will have his back turned, if you will, from the audience, just facing this enormous machine. But But frankly, in 2014, I'm sure you had IMDb, so everybody knew it was Benedict Cumberbatch. So I don't think they successfully managed to create the intrigue. But I think that the posters that they did was really good and borrowed a lot from the cinematography, which I think we see happened a lot. TV radio spots were part of it as well, and each distributor were doing their things. But I think for me, the one thing that I didn't appreciate, because we don't get to see that too often, is that movie had a big festival run, a good 4 to 6 months, and that would allow distributors time to plan their own marketing. And actually, you'll find that there was different trailers, different cuts of the trailer, different shape and storytelling of the trailer depending on the territory. So the UK trailer was slightly different to the US one, different to the French one, different to the Chinese one, and so on and so forth. And I thought that was we don't get to hear that. Sometimes you have the one international trailer, which is what we see people do a lot currently. But I thought, I don't know how you feel that to give people time to take on board what this movie is about, so they can actually cut their own trailer to suit the different audiences. I thought that was a smart move.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, sometimes generic misses the point, doesn't it? And I think that different cultures will respond to different angles, and it was a good idea to allow them to do that.
I'll close there for this little review of the film marketing with an exceptional movie. I hope people will find it and watch it again. On two things. So this was literally listed on so many awards from the Oscars, the BAFTAs, and so on. Sadly, only won. It won the award for Best Adapted Screenplay, but I think the nomination itself were part of the PR and the kind of raising awareness of the importance of this film. But there's a kind of a saying that there's a bit of a phrase that comes back over and over again, which is an invention, really, creation of the screenwriter. And I think that it kind of captures not just the film, it doesn't capture just Alan Turing, but actually the people who worked at Bletchley Park. And I suppose, what has been coined yesterday on BBC Radio, the Great Generation. And it goes as follows. Sometimes it is the people who no one imagines anything of who do the things that no one can imagine.
That's lovely, isn't it? Thank you, Pascal. Lots and lots of great insights there. I mean, I love the striking images of the poster campaign, and we've almost got character shots there, haven't we, of Keira Knightley and Benedict Cumberbatch, as well as the standard posters that show the machine as well. So I do love the posters and the imagery from this particular film. So we've come to the end of our marketing magazine show once again. Thank you, everybody, so much for tuning in, whether you watch this as a video, whether you listen to this as an audio. We'd like to thank you for doing that. Please do share and also subscribe if you're not. If you've got any films that you'd like us to cover, let us know. If you've got any content that you'd like us to analyze, let us know. And if you've got any marketing tech and apps that you'd like us to review, again, let us know. We are here to interact with you, the listener, and you, the viewer. So, without further ado, let's get out of here, Pascal. Thank you so much once again, everybody, for watching and listening to Two Geeks in a Marketing podcast. Until next time, go out there and make sure that your marketing is done right. I was Roger Edwards, and he was Pascal Fintoni.